There is a country that exists in two places at once. It exists in the imagination of the world, shaped by headlines, filtered through the narrow aperture of geopolitics, reduced to argument and abstraction. And it exists in reality, four seasons colliding across a single afternoon, a plateau so vast it bends toward the curvature of the earth, mountains that hold snow while the desert below them shimmers in heat that has no patience for shade. This is Iran, one of the oldest continuously inhabited territories on the surface of the planet, a land where empires were born and buried and born again, not as metaphor, but as geological fact, layer upon layer pressed into the same soil that receives the same rainfall, reflects the same light. To travel through Iran is to move through time without trying, to stand in a desert and feel the weight of centuries not as abstraction but as atmosphere, the particular quality of silence that accumulates over millennia, to drive a road through mountains that were ancient when Rome was young, to watch a city's lights appear at dusk and know that a city has burned here for more than 2,000 years. What follows is not an argument. It is not a portrait of a people or a verdict on a nation. It is something simpler and something more difficult. It is an attempt to see the land, to follow its contours, submit to its scale, and trust that geography, given enough attention, eventually becomes revelation. Iran occupies a plateau. That single fact shapes everything that follows. The Iranian plateau sits at an average elevation of nearly 1,200 meters above sea level, a vast, tilted table of land locked between two of the world's great mountain systems and surrounded, at its edges, by seas that feel from the interior impossibly distant. The Alborz Range seals the north. The Zagros chains fold themselves across the west in ridge after ridge, running from Turkey to the Persian Gulf like the spines of enormous creatures pressed together in sleep. From the air, the country reveals itself as a study in geological drama. Brown folds of mountain give way to pale desert basins. Salt flats appear, white and featureless as blank pages, surrounded by ranges that catch the afternoon light and hold it in shades of copper and rust. River valleys cut downward from the high country, green lines threading through terrain that is otherwise stripped of color by a sun that has been at this work for a very long time. The Alborz Mountains, forming Iran's northern spine, rise from sea level at the Caspian coast to peaks that exceed 5,600 meters within a horizontal distance of fewer than 60 kilometers. Mount Damavand, a dormant stratovolcano, the highest point in the Middle East and all of Asia west of the Hindu Kush, stands alone above its neighbors, its cone so perfectly proportioned it seems engineered rather than formed. Snow clings to its upper reaches for most of the year. From Tehran's northern suburbs, on clear winter mornings, the mountain appears close enough to touch and cold enough to make the city feel briefly provisional, a thing built in the shadow of something far older and indifferent to its presence. To the west, the Zagros Mountains begin gently, their lower flanks rounded and almost approachable, before rising into a chaos of compressed ridgelines that form one of the most formidable natural barriers on Earth. The ancient road from Mesopotamia to the Iranian plateau crossed these mountains through passes that were difficult in summer and lethal in winter, and every empire that ever moved through them understood exactly what it meant to hold or to lose that crossing. Between these ranges, the interior plateau holds two great deserts. The Dasht-e-Kavir, the Great Salt Desert, occupies the north-central plateau. It is not a desert of sand dunes and romantic silhouettes. It is something stranger and more severe, a landscape of crusted salt flats, mud flats of extraordinary fragility, and low desert hamadas that stretch in every direction without reference point or relief. In summer, the surface temperature can exceed 70 degrees Celsius. Animals and plants that exist here do so through strategies of radical adaptation. Water, when it falls at all, evaporates before it reaches the soil. The silence in the Dasht-e-Kavir on a windless day is the kind of silence that makes the hearing question itself. To the southeast, the Dasht-e-Lut, the desert of emptiness, holds temperature records that are among the highest ever recorded on the planet's surface. It is a landscape of extraordinary landforms. Yardangs, wind-sculpted ridges of compressed sediment, rise from the desert floor like the prows of ships, arranged by prevailing winds into formations that from the air resemble the ghost of a city or the ruins of one. The Lut has been nominated as one of the few places on Earth where no microbial life has been detected. It is, in the most literal sense, the outer edge of the biosphere. And yet, Iran is not only desert. The Caspian coast, Iran's northern shore, receives more than 1,900 millimeters of rainfall annually in some sections, making it one of the wettest inhabited regions of the Middle East. The Hyrcanian forests that cover the Alborz slopes above the coast are among the world's most ancient temperate rainforests, their canopies so dense that in the rainy season, the light that reaches the floor has the quality of something filtered through deep water. These forests have existed in continuous form for more than 25 million years. They predate the ice ages. They survived the glaciations that reshaped the rest of the northern hemisphere by retreating only slightly, then returning. Between the Caspian shore and the interior plateau, the temperature differential can exceed 40 degrees. To descend from the Alborz into the lowlands of Gilan province is to pass through multiple climatic zones in the time it takes to drive an hour. The air thickens, the vegetation crowds the road. The sky, which was vast and sharp above the mountains, becomes intimate and overcast, and the smell of the earth changes in ways that are difficult to describe but impossible to miss. In the south, the provinces along the Persian Gulf edge into tropics. The mangrove forests of Keshem Island, the largest island in the Persian Gulf, form labyrinths of salt-tolerant vegetation above tidal mudflats rich with life. The water here is warm enough year-round to support coral. The air in summer is so humid that merely standing still produces sweat. This is the geographic paradox of Iran, a country that contains, within its borders, conditions ranging from subarctic to tropical, from the driest to the wettest, from the highest to the lowest, all compressed into a territory roughly the size of Western Europe, all connected by roads that were, in their earliest incarnations, among the most consequential in human history.
What the landscape does with light is its own argument for attention. The Iranian plateau's elevation and aridity produce an atmosphere that performs unusually. Sunsets here last longer than they should. The sky passes through gradations of color, saffron to amber, to a red so dark it approaches violet, over intervals of 20 or 30 minutes, moving slowly enough to watch the shift. Dawn arrives the same way, a gradual brightening that seems reluctant to commit, as if the day is considering its options. In winter, the mountain ranges accumulate snow in quantities that transform the landscape into something monochromatic and still. The Zagros villages, built of mud brick the same color as the earth they stand on, become almost invisible against snow-covered slopes. Roads through the high passes close for days. The plateau, at elevation, freezes over, and the cities that sit at 1,500 meters and above experience a winter that most outsiders, thinking of the Middle East, never account for. Spring arrives violently. The snowmelt from the Alborz and Zagros feed rivers that have been absent for months, and within weeks, the slopes that were gray and brown are covered in wildflowers. The original wildflowers, in fact. Iran is one of the world's centers of origin for the tulip, the iris, and the rose. The Persian spring has a momentum to it, a sense of long suppressed color forcing itself through. It lasts, at lower elevations, no more than 6 weeks. Then the heat returns, and the colors recede, and the landscape settles back into the palette of ochre and sand and shadow that it maintains for most of the year.
Every road in Iran has been a road before. The routes that modern highways follow, that the asphalt traces across the plateau, are, in most cases, the same routes that caravans followed, that armies marched, that traders from China to Rome moved through goods and ideas and diseases and seeds.
The geography that determined where ancient routes ran is the same geography that determined where modern roads would be built. Mountains pass where mountains always passed. Rivers cross where rivers always crossed. The Royal Road of the Achaemenid Empire, the first great administrative road in human history, stretching approximately 2,700 kilometers from Susa to Sardis, was not so much a construction project as a formalization. The Persians identified the existing paths, engineered the difficult sections, built the relay stations, and connected what had already, for centuries, been connected informally. Herodotus recorded that the royal couriers could travel the length of the road in 9 days. A caravan took 90. The difference between 9 and 90 days tells most of what needs to be said about the relationship between infrastructure and power in the ancient world. To drive from Tehran toward Esfahan today is to follow, more or less, the route that has connected the plateau's great cities for 3 millennia. The highway is modern and well-maintained, but the geography it traverses has the quality of something already known. The same hills, the same dry riverbeds, the same shimmering distance. 57 kilometers northeast of Shiraz, a plain opens toward a mountain, and at the base of that mountain, elevated on a platform of limestone cut from the bedrock and faced with dressed stone, the ruins of Persepolis rise above the surrounding landscape with a composure that seems, after 2,500 years, entirely deliberate. Persepolis was the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire, not where the emperor lived primarily, but where the empire performed itself, where delegations from across the known world arrived to present tribute, where the architecture of power was given its most explicit physical expression. Construction began under Darius the Great around 515 BCE and continued under his successors for more than a century. At its completion, the complex covered an area of approximately 125,000 square meters. To visit Persepolis in the early morning before the tourist coaches arrive is to experience the ruins in something close to their proper atmosphere. The light comes from the east at a low angle, falling across the faces of the carved reliefs with a warmth that makes the stone appear almost animate. The reliefs themselves, 2,500 years of exposure has softened them only slightly, depict the procession of delegations, Medes and Elamites and Armenians and Egyptians and Ionians and Parthians and Bactrians and Arabians, each delegation carved in a register of figures moving toward the presence of the king, each figure individualized enough to carry the suggestion of a real face, a real body, a real life. The plateau stretches south from the platform. A dry riverbed catches the morning light. Somewhere in the middle distance, a road follows the same line it has always followed, and the mountains beyond it are the same mountains, holding the same light that Darius saw from these same stones. 57 kilometers northeast of Shiraz, a plain opens toward a mountain, and at the base of that mountain, elevated on a platform of limestone cut from the bedrock and faced with dressed stone, the ruins of Persepolis rise above the surrounding landscape with a composure that seems, after 2,500 years, entirely deliberate. Persepolis was the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenid Empire, not where the emperor lived primarily, but where the empire performed itself, where delegations from across the known world arrived to present tribute, where the architecture of power was given its most explicit physical expression. Construction began under Darius the Great around 515 BCE and continued under his successors for more than a century. The Silk Road was not a road, it was a network. Multiple overlapping routes that shifted over centuries depending on political conditions, water availability, and the preferences of the merchants and pilgrims who used them. But through the Iranian plateau, the routes converged. The geography of the region, its mountain walls, its desert barriers, its handful of viable passes and fertile valleys funneled the transcontinental traffic through specific corridors that changed little over 1,000 years of active use. The great caravanserai that dot the plateau are the Silk Road made visible. There are hundreds of them across Iran, some reduced to rubble, some still standing in their near original condition. some that have been restored and converted to hotels, where travelers now sleep in rooms that caravans once rested in. The form is constant, a square or rectangular enclosure thick-walled against both cold and bandits, with a central courtyard open to the sky and chambers arranged around the perimeter for merchants, animals, and goods. They were placed at intervals of roughly 30 to 40 kilometers, approximately 1 day's travel, across the plateau, and in their active period, they constituted a kind of distributed city, a linear metropolis spread across 2,000 kilometers of difficult terrain. The most celebrated is the Shah Abbas Caravanserai at Miandasht in the desert northeast of Tehran. It was built in the 17th century under the Safavid dynasty, a dynasty that understood trade as strategic policy and invested in infrastructure accordingly, and it remains one of the most complete examples of the form. In Khuzestan province, in the lowlands where the Zagros foothills give way to the alluvial plain of the ancient Fertile Crescent, the city of Susa carries human occupation stretching back at least 7,000 years. It was a city when most of the places in the world that would become cities were still forests or grasslands. It was continuously inhabited through Elamite and Achaemenid and Seleucid and Parthian and Sassanid and Islamic and Mongol periods until the 13th century CE, when Mongol depredations finally ended an urban sequence that had run without interruption for millennia. The archaeological tells at Susa rise above the surrounding plain in low mounds, the compressed residue of human habitation, each layer sealing the one below. To walk across them is to walk across time in the most literal sense. The area now sits within the modern city of Shush. Life continues at the edges of the ruins. Tehran is a city that grew faster than any city has a right to grow, and survived it. A settlement of no particular significance until the late 18th century, when the Qajar dynasty selected it as capital, partly for its defensible position against the Alborz Mountains to the north, partly for its water supply from mountain streams, partly, perhaps, for no better reason than dynastic preference. Tehran has expanded in the 2 centuries since into a metropolitan area of 15 million people spread across a tilted plain that rises from south to north at a gradient steep enough to create significant altitude difference between the wealthier northern districts and the industrial southern ones. From the air, Tehran is immediately legible as a city shaped by topography. The street grid, regular in the flat southern sections, begins to fragment as it moves north into the foothills, roads following contours, splitting around hills, ending at the edges of ravines. The northern suburbs press into valleys between the first ridges of the Alborz, and at their upper limits, ski resorts begin within an hour of the city center. In winter, it is entirely possible to ski in the morning and return to a city in afternoon sunlight warm enough to sit outside in. The mountains define Tehran's orientation in ways that go beyond geography. The Alborz sit to the north, visible from any elevation in the city on days when the smog clears, and their presence organizes the city's axis. North is up in the literal and social sense. The mountains provide fresh air, fresh water, weekend escape, and the reminder that the city, for all its density and noise and complexity, sits at the foot of something that simply does not care about it. At street level, Tehran is a study in layered decades. Qajar-era buildings survive in pockets, their brick facades and arched windows compressed between concrete towers built in the accelerated development years. The Bazaar district in the south of the city center is one of the largest covered markets in the world. Yazd is a desert city, and everything about it knows it. Situated in the center of the Iranian plateau between the Dasht-e-Kavir and the Dasht-e-Lut, at an elevation of 1,200 meters in a basin surrounded by dry mountains, Yazd has been continuously inhabited for approximately 7,000 years. Its persistence in this location, inhospitable by most measures,
temperatures is a testament to the ingenuity of its water management and its architectural response to an environment that offers intense solar radiation, minimal rainfall, and temperature extremes that swing 40 degrees between summer day and winter night. The city's skyline is defined by two elements: the minarets of its mosques, rising above the compact density of the old city, and the bodgirs, wind catchers, that project from the rooftops of traditional houses and public buildings in a forest of vertical shafts. The bodgir is one of the most effective passive cooling technologies ever developed. A tower open on the windward side catches prevailing breezes at height, where the air is cooler and cleaner than at street level, channels them downward through the building, and exhausts them from a lower opening on the leeward side, creating a convective cycle that can reduce interior temperatures by 15 degrees or more without any mechanical assistance. The wind catchers of Yazd have been operating on this principle for at least 1,000 years. The Old City of Yazd, recognized by UNESCO as one of the oldest living cities in the world, is built of mud brick, the same soil, compressed and dried, from which the surrounding desert is made. The distinction between city and landscape is, in Yazd, a matter of geometry. The desert is flat and formless. The city is the same material. From a rooftop at midday, the city extends in every direction as a pale, low topography. Its surfaces the same color as the plateau that surrounds it, its edges dissolving into the heat haze without a clear boundary.
Between the cities, there is the land itself, the drives across the Iranian plateau, between Tehran and Kashan, between Kashan and Esfahan, between Esfahan and Yazd, between Yazd and Kerman are long by any measure, and their length is not incidental. The distances between cities in central Iran correspond to the distances between water sources, between viable agricultural zones, between the places where the ancient routes allowed settlement. The emptiness between settlements is the true scale of the plateau, and no amount of highway engineering has changed it. The road between Yazd and Kerman passes through a landscape of increasing severity. The mountains to either side become more barren, their lower slopes bare of even the sparse scrub that covers the plateau further north. The roadway cuts through periodic hamadas, stony desert pavements of wind-polished stones from which every fine particle has long since been removed. Salt flats appear as white interruptions in the ochre distance. The sky overhead is the blue of high altitude and low humidity, a blue so saturated it seems wrong, like a color proof before correction. To stop the vehicle in this landscape and stand outside for 5 minutes is to understand what the ancient travelers understood. The road is everything. The road is the difference between arrival and disappearance. The caravanserai at the next day's stage is not a convenience, but a condition of survival. The distance between water sources is not a geographic detail, but an existential one.
The Lut Desert, visible from the road that skirts its western edge, does not announce itself with drama. It simply begins. The terrain becomes more inhospitable, the landforms more abraded, the color more uniform. The Yardangs, those wind-carved ridges of compressed sediment, appear in the middle distance, their forms suggesting ruins without being ruins, their scale difficult to judge until a road or a vehicle provides a reference. Some Yardangs in the Lut reach heights of 80 meters. They stretch for kilometers in lines perpendicular to the prevailing wind, organized by the same force that created them into formations as orderly as anything built by intention. The satellite temperature records for the Lut Desert, surface temperatures exceeding 70 degrees Celsius, are difficult to comprehend at ground level. The human body has no reference for that scale of heat as an ambient condition. What the body does register, standing at the edge of the Lut in summer, is the direction of the sun as a physical force rather than a light source.
In the mountain valleys above the plateau, in the high folds of the Alborz and Zagros, there are villages that the geography has isolated in ways that roads only partially corrected. Masule, in Gilan province above the Caspian coast, is built into a steep mountain slope with a
compression that makes rooftops serve as streets. The roof of one level becomes the pathway to the next, and so on up the hillside until the uppermost houses press against the rock face above them. The village receives over 1,000 millimeters of rainfall annually. It is perpetually green, perpetually damp, perpetually enclosed by fog or cloud for much of the autumn and winter. Its timber construction and stepped terracing represent a building tradition adapted to wet, weight-bearing soil, to the need to maximize south-facing exposure for warmth, and to a slope so steep that flat ground is simply not available. The contrast with the mud-brick desert villages of Yazd province, low, tight, turning blank walls to the sun and the wind, is the contrast of the country itself. Both solve the same problem, shelter in an extreme environment, with solutions drawn from whatever the landscape provides. Timber and slate in the wet north, mud and bad gear in the dry center, stone and carved cave in the volcanic formations of Kandavan. Kandavan, in East Azerbaijan province, is a village carved into volcanic rock formations, tufa cones formed by ancient eruptions and shaped by erosion into irregular vertical columns that rise from the mountainside like fingers. The village's inhabitants have carved their dwellings directly into these formations for at least 7 centuries, creating a settlement that from a distance resembles a natural geological feature and only at closer range resolves into a human habitation. Windows in the rock, doors, smoke from interiors, the sound of water in the stream below. These villages are not museum pieces. They are working settlements whose unusual forms derive entirely from the logic of their environments, from the specific combination of material, climate, and topography that their particular locations imposed. They are the most honest architecture on Earth, buildings that could not exist anywhere else, and that exist here only because here demanded exactly this response.
There is an hour on the Iranian plateau when everything becomes amber. It happens in the late afternoon when the sun is low enough that its light travels through a long horizontal slice of atmosphere before reaching the land. The dust that is always present in the plateau's air, the fine particles that haze the horizon at any hour, acts as a diffuser, spreading and warming the light until the landscape is illuminated not by a point source, but by the entire western sky, a wall of warm light that casts shadows of extraordinary length and reveals textures in the terrain that the overhead sun of midday erases completely. At this hour, the ruins look most like themselves. The columns of Persepolis cast shadows 40 meters long across the platform. The domes of Isfahan turn from turquoise to deep gold and back again as the angle shifts. The bodgirs of Yazd become silhouettes. The desert, which at noon seems flat and featureless, reveals itself as a surface of extraordinary variation. Micro-dunes and deflation hollows and the ancient tracks of long dry water, all rendered legible by low-angle light and long shadow. The plateau holds this light for longer than lower terrain would. Elevation keeps the sun above the geometric horizon for minutes after it is set below the local horizon, extending the amber hour into something approaching an amber 2 hours. Travelers crossing the plateau in the late afternoon, driving west into a sun that drops slowly toward mountain ranges visible at the edge of vision, pass through a landscape that is, for that brief period, exactly as extraordinary as any landscape on Earth.
The Alborz Range does not merely separate Tehran from the Caspian, it separates worlds. South of the range, the climate is continental and semi-arid. Hot summers, cold winters, low rainfall, the particular quality of light that comes from an atmosphere containing little moisture. North of the range, the climate is humid subtropical. Warm summers, mild winters, rain that arrives from the Caspian Sea and persistent gray fronts that move inland, drop their moisture on the northern slopes and exhaust themselves before crossing the ridge. The road through the Alborz, from Karaj in Tehran's western suburbs to Kazvin on the plateau, or through the Haraz Valley between Tehran and Amal, is one of the most scenically dramatic drives in Asia.
The southern approach climbs through arid foothills, the vegetation sparse, the rock faces bare and geological. Then the vegetation appears, first sparse and low, then increasingly dense as elevation increases and moisture accumulates. Then the tree line, the Hyrcanian forest, ancient and dark canopied, overhanging the road in sections and reducing the sky to a narrow corridor above the tarmac. At the passes, some above 3,000 meters, the view south on a clear day extends across the full width of the Iranian plateau. The plateau is visible as a tonal shift, the land south of the mountains slightly paler, slightly more uniform, the individual features of cities and roads and dry riverbeds lost at this distance, the whole thing resolving into the abstract geography of a raised plain seen from above and from the edge. The descent to the Caspian changes the air before it changes anything visible. The humidity arrives as a warmth and a weight, the atmosphere thickening, the inside of the lungs registering moisture they have not encountered for days of plateau travel. Then the forest closes in. Then the first rice paddies appear and terraced steps cut into hillsides that would, without them, produce nothing edible. Then the coastal plain, flat and green and disconcertingly domestic after the plateau's severity, and the Caspian shore, brown, slightly brackish, the world's largest landlocked body of water, calm or dramatic depending on the season and the weather system moving across it. The Caspian does not look like the sea it technically isn't. It behaves like a sea.
Iran's southern coastline along the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman presents a different order of climate entirely. Bandar Abbas, the country's principal southern port, sits at sea level in a humidity that, in summer, makes the air feel solid. The Gulf is shallow. Its maximum depth of only 90 meters makes it one of the shallowest seas in the world. The mountains visible inland from the port, the southern extensions of the Zagros, rise steeply from the coastal plain, and on winter days they hold snow on their upper ridges, while the port below operates in temperatures mild enough for shirt sleeves. Keshm Island, separated from the mainland by the Strait of Keshm and visible from the shore at Bandar Abbas, is the largest island in the Persian Gulf by area and one of the most geologically unusual. Its rock formations, the Chaku Canyon, carved by water through sedimentary layers of extraordinary variety, the Hara mangrove forest, the Stars Valley, where erosion has produced forms that seem to belong to another planet, give the island the quality of a place where the Earth's processes have been put on display with particular clarity. The canyon walls, stripped by erosion to their constituent strata, read like a geological timescale made visual, layer after layer, in colors ranging from cream to ochre to deep rust, each layer a different chapter of sedimentation and time.
Iran shares borders with 15 countries, a geopolitical density matched by few nations on Earth. To the north, Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkmenistan. To the northwest, Turkey. To the west, Iraq. To the southeast, Pakistan. To the east, Afghanistan. Each border represents not just a political division, but a geographic one. The terrain that the border crosses, the ecological zones it intersects, the human populations whose lands it divides.
The northwestern borders cross through some of the most historically contested terrain in Asia. The Lake Urmia Basin, site of the world's second-largest hypersaline lake, now reduced by diversion and drought to less than 10% of its historical volume, marks the western approach to Azerbaijan province, a region whose cultural and linguistic character has been shaped by millennia of movement between Anatolia and the Iranian plateau. The border with Iraq follows, in its southern sections, the Shat al-Arab waterway, the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers as they approach the Persian Gulf. This is ancient Mesopotamia, and the terrain on both sides of the political boundary is the same. The vast alluvial plain of two great rivers, flat and fertile and subject to flooding, the horizon everywhere distant, and the sky enormous over a land that lacks any vertical feature to interrupt it. At the eastern border with Afghanistan and Pakistan, the landscape shifts again. The Baluchistan province of Iran, extending toward these frontiers, is semi-desert and mountainous in alternating sections, an extension of the terrain that continues without political interruption into the vast uplands of Central and South Asia. Here, the borders are recent. The terrain they cross is indifferent to their presence.
It is necessary in any honest account of Iran in the early 21st century to acknowledge what the country means in the world's imagination versus what it is as a physical place. For much of the past 4 decades, Iran has existed in global consciousness primarily through the aperture of geopolitics, sanctions, nuclear negotiations, regional tensions, the complex dynamics of a regional power operating within an international framework that regards it with suspicion. These are real matters. They have real consequences for the people who live in the country and for the relationships between nations. But they have very little to do with the Alborz Mountains at dawn, or the color of the tiles on the dome of the Sheikh Lotfallah Mosque at noon, or the particular quality of silence in the Dasht Lut at the hour when the temperature peaks and the air itself seems unwilling to move. The land has been here longer than any of the frameworks imposed upon it. The rivers have followed their courses for millions of years. The mountain passes that Alexander used are the same mountain passes that roads use today, because the mountains have not moved and the logic of terrain has not changed. The cities that have stood for 2 and 3 and 4,000 years have survived the transitions between empires and ideologies and international alignments with a persistence that is itself a form of commentary on the permanence of those frameworks. What the traveler finds coming to this place with attention rather than conclusion is a country of extraordinary geographic complexity and great historical depth, whose surface, the land, the light, the shape of the mountains, the breadth of the deserts, precedes and exceeds the arguments currently made about it.
This is not to minimize those arguments. It is to insist that any complete account of a place must include what the place is made of, and what it has been, and what it looks like from the road at the hour when the light is right and the distance is vast, and the sky holds more color than any name for color can adequately capture. Return to the plateau one more time, to the high center of things, where the air is thin and dry and the light has no interest in sentiment. A road runs across the basin below a range of mountains whose names have changed at least 4 times in recorded history. The road follows a line that has been a route since before the road existed, since before any of the languages in which its name has been recorded were spoken. Somewhere along this route, in the stratigraphy of a site not yet fully excavated, are the remains of a caravanserai that was itself built on the remains of an earlier stopping place, which was itself established where a spring made stopping possible. And the spring is still there, and still cold in summer, and the mountains above it are the same mountains. This is the central fact of Iran as a geographic experience: continuity, not the sentimental continuity of nostalgia or the nationalist continuity of deliberate mythology, but the continuity of land, the persistence of terrain, of climate, of the routes that terrain and climate together determine. Empires have ended here and begun here and ended again. Languages have replaced languages. The names of cities have been transliterated through Greek and Arabic and Persian and back through a dozen scholarly conventions into the forms used today. But the city has been where it is because the water was where it was, and the pass was where it was, and the soil was what it was. And these things have not changed.
There comes a moment on every long journey when the destination stops being ahead and becomes behind, and the traveler finds themselves moving not towards something, but away from it. In Iran, that moment tends to come somewhere on the plateau, in the hour between afternoon and evening, when the mountains are visible in both directions and the road is straight and the light is doing what it does. What is left? After the road has been covered and the sites have been visited and the cities have been passed through, what persists? The smell of dust and diesel and occasionally flowers on a mountain road above a valley. the sound of wind in a desert that was silent a moment before, the visual fact of a dome seen from a distance at a particular angle and a particular light when it is impossible to determine whether the blue of the tiles is reflecting the sky or the sky is reflecting the tiles, the temperature of a caravanserai courtyard at midnight, the stone releasing the heat it has absorbed all day, air above it cooling from the high altitude, both processes happening simultaneously, so that the temperature at chest height and the temperature at foot level are measurably different. These are not experiences that translate well into argument or conclusion. They are the texture of a place, the accumulated sensory evidence of terrain and climate, and the long presence of human building in a landscape that preceded it by geological ages. They are what travel is for.
Iran is a country that has been many things to many people in many centuries. Homeland, empire, crossroads, obstacle, prize, symbol, and argument. What it is, beneath all of that, is a plateau between mountains, a desert held between seas, a land whose geography has shaped more human history than most people from outside it will ever pause to consider. The road continues. It has always continued. Somewhere ahead, where the light is changing and the mountains are doing what mountains do at this hour, a camel caravan is crossing a landscape that looks exactly as it did when there were camel caravans. Somewhere, the Alborz is holding snow against a late autumn sky. Somewhere, the tiles of Isfahan are performing their daily recalculation of light. Somewhere, a Badgir stands in the Yazd evening, catching air that is cooler at height, drawing it down into a house that has stayed livable through 40 summers by this means alone. And the plateau holds it all, the ruins and the roads and the cities and the deserts, with the impartiality of terrain that has been here since before the first human recognized it as place and will remain here in some form until the last human forgets it. This is the land. This is Iran.